Good Wednesday, everyone, and welcome into today's daily Bible reading for October the 18th. Today we are reading together in First Chronicles chapter 19 and First Chronicles chapter 20. We are solidly in the middle of David's reign at this point, and this section focuses a lot on things surrounding the military and war and disputes that David and his people have with the nations around them. And then beginning in chapter 22, once again, chapter 22, we're going to see more focus on more spiritual minded things, we might say, things concerning the temple, the Levites, and things of that nature. But for today, here in chapters 19 and 20, we want to think more about some of David's battles that he had against various kings, one being the Ammonites. We're going to see this story in chapter 19, and then we're going to see some continued battles in chapter 20 with the Ammonites, and then some victories that David and his warriors had against the Philistines in chapter 20, at the end of chapter 20. So let's begin reading here in First Chronicles chapter 19 and verse number 1. First Chronicles 19, verse number 1, sometime later, King Nahash of the Ammonites died, and his son became king in his place. Then David said, I'll show kindness to Hanun, son of Nahash, because his father showed kindness to me. So David sent messengers to console him concerning his father. However, when David's emissaries arrived in the land of the Ammonites to console him, the Ammonite leaders said to Hanun, just because David has sent men with condolences for you, do you really believe he's showing respect for your father? Instead, haven't his emissaries come in order to scout out, overthrow, and spy on the land? So Hanun took David's emissaries, shaved them, cut their clothes in half at their hips, and sent them away. It was reported to David about his men, so he sent messengers to meet them, since the men were deeply humiliated. The king said, stay in Jericho until your beards grow back, then return. When the Ammonites realized they had made themselves repulsive to David, Hanun and the Ammonites sent 38 tons of silver to hire chariots and horsemen from Aram Naharaim, Naram Ma'akah, and Zobah. They hired 32,000 chariots and the king of Ma'akah with his army, who came and camped near Medeba. The Ammonites also came together from their cities for the battle. David heard about this and sent Joab and all the elite troops. The Ammonites marched out and lined up in battle formation at the entrance of the city, while the kings who had come were in the field by themselves. When Joab saw that there was a battle line in front of him and another behind him, he chose some of Israel's finest young men and lined up in formation to engage the Arameans. He placed the rest of the forces under the command of his brother Abishai. They lined up in formation to engage the Ammonites. If the Arameans are too strong for me, Joab said, then you'll be my help. However, if the Ammonites are too strong for you, I'll help you. Be strong. Let's prove ourselves strong for our people and for the cities of our God. May Yahweh's will be done. Joab and the people with him approached the Arameans for battle, and they fled before him. When the Ammonites saw that the Arameans had fled, they likewise fled before Joab's brother Abishai and entered the city. Then Joab went to Jerusalem. When the Arameans realized they had been defeated by Israel, they sent messengers to summon the Arameans who were beyond the Euphrates River. They were led by Shophak and the commander of Hadadezer's army. When this was reported to David, he gathered all Israel and crossed the Jordan. He came to the Arameans and lined up against them. When David lined up to engage them, they fought against him, but the Arameans fled before Israel. And David killed 7,000 of their charioteers and 40,000 foot soldiers. He also killed Shophak, commander of the army. When Hadadezer's subjects saw that they had been defeated by Israel, they made peace with David and became his subjects. After this, the Arameans were never willing to help the Ammonites again. Chapter 20, in the spring, when the kings go out to war, Joab led the army and destroyed the Ammonites' lands. He came to Rabbah and besieged it, but David remained in Jerusalem. Joab attacked Rabbah and demolished it. Then David took the crown from the head of their king, and it was placed on David's head. He found that the crown weighed 75 pounds of gold, and there was a precious stone in it. In addition, David took away a large quantity of plunder from the city. They brought out the axes, they brought out the people who were in it and put them to work with saws, iron picks, and axes. David did the same to all the Ammonite cities then he and all the troops returned to Jerusalem. After this, a war broke out with the Philistines at Gazer. And at that time, Sibbecai, the Hushathite, killed Sippai, a descendant of the Rephaim, and the Philistines were subdued. Once again, there was a battle with the Philistines, and Helnanan, son of Jair, killed Lami, the brother of Goliath, of Gath. The shaft of his spear was like a weaver's beam. There was still another battle at Gath, where there was a man of extraordinary stature, with 6 fingers on each hand and 6 toes on each foot, 24 in all. He too was descended from the giant. When he taunted Israel, Jonathan, son of David's brother Shimei, killed him. These were the descendants of the giant of Gath, killed by David and his soldiers. And that is the reading of 1 Chronicles chapters 19 and 20. We read in beginning of chapter 19 that there is a Ammonite king whose son is Hanun, and David seeks to show kindness to him over the passing of his father Nahash. And the text says, because his father showed kindness to me. This is what David said. We don't know exactly what this kindness was. Maybe it was the fact that they had common issues with Saul, the previous king of Israel. Maybe they had bonded in some way over that shared enemy. So David sends his messengers to Hanun to basically, this is just, it seems to be a political move just to continue to show that there is some cordiality between the two nations. Maybe same thing as we might do today in our country. You know, if the leader of Canada or Mexico, somebody there dies, we would send representatives there to just show kindness in that way, just to again show cordiality and to keep up good appearances and such. That's what David's doing, and David seems to be very honest in this. But the issue comes from the fact that those that were advising Hanun, they make it seem as if David is doing this with ulterior motives. Now, he's not just sending these people to come and to show kindness to you. No, he's sending so that he can spy on you. Unfortunately, Hanun listens to them. This is not what David is doing. The text gives us no indication that David has any sort of ulterior motives, but that's how they take it, and they end up humiliating David's emissaries. They shave their beards. Remember, in the text of Samuel, where this takes place, they shave half the beard off, which is just very humiliating. Only have half a beard. I mean, I guess for me, I basically have half a beard because my beard's not very good. But for those who have very strong beards, cut half of it off. Well, that would be very embarrassing. Not only that, they cut their clothes halfway down their body, and they send them away humiliated. They're in a very, very shameful state, and they're not even able to go all the way home. They only go as far as Jericho. David hears about this. He knows that they're deeply humiliated. And instead of him demanding that they come home at once, he allows them to remain there so that they can allow their beards to grow out so they can then travel like they normally would and take some time to recover from this deep humiliation. It's admirable, I think, of David to do this, not to immediately become incensed, because this was not only a slight against his emissaries, this was a slight against David. It'd be very easy for us to immediately become very upset whenever somebody does us wrong and just immediately react to that. But David slows his roll, says, you know what, just y'all take care of yourselves, allow yourselves to recover, and then we'll bring you home when is necessary. Now, of course, though, David is not very pleased with this, and the text tells us that the Ammonites became repulsive in David's sight. He definitely did not like them very much at all, and they take the step of hiring mercenaries from Aram in order to come and to fight against Israel. So David hears about this again. Remember, David initially took the step of showing kindness. He responded to Hanun's loss by sending these emissaries. Now he's responding to their aggression by getting Joab and the elite troops and setting them up to be able to fight against the Ammonites, not just the Ammonites, but also the Arameans, who have now joined their side. And what we see is that Joab sees that he's outflanked. He's got Ammonites on one side, he's got Arameans on the other side, and he says, all right, we're going to stand back to back, and we're just going to fight. If I see that those that are against you are too strong for you, I'll turn and help you, and vice versa. If you see that those who are fighting against me are too strong for me, you turn around and you help me. Let's be strong. Let's just be strong, and let's prove ourselves strong for our people and for the cities of our God. But here is, in this moment, again, Job's a very complicated character within the narrative of David's reign. But here's a good moment where he says, may Yahweh's will be done. We're going to be strong, but we recognize this is all in Yahweh's hands. So this trust in Yahweh always proves to be a worthwhile endeavor, but it definitely does in this case. It proves that this was the right thing for him to trust in Yahweh and to just focus on doing the best he could, but allowing it at the end of the day to be in Yahweh's hands. For the Ammonites flee, they end up running away from Joab, and then let's see here. The Arameans fled from Joab, and then the Ammonites fled from Abishai. I think I have that right. And at this point, they pursue them. They make sure that they are defeated here in this moment. He gathers all David. David hears about this, that they fled. So he gathers all Israel. Remember, before it seems it was just the elite troops. It was the best of the best. Now he gathers the rest of the forces, and he says, we're going up against them. We're going to fight against them. He engages them. He fights against them. The Arameans, they flee from Israel. David kills 7,000 of their charioteers, 40,000 foot soldiers. He also kills the commander of the army, Shaphat, and Hadadezer, who is the king of the Arameans. When he sees that they've been defeated, he then makes peace. He makes peace with David. They become David's subjects. And then the Arameans say, you know what? We're not helping the Ammonites ever again. No, don't care how much money they give us. We're not doing this. That was not a good idea. So they're now going to align and side with Israel. Well, once again, in chapter 20, realize that the mission still isn't done. The Ammonites still need to be snuffed out completely and brought under total subjection. So you might recognize what is said here. In the spring, when the kings march out to war, Joab led the army and destroyed the Ammonites' lands. And he came to Rabbah and besieged it. But David remained in Jerusalem. That sounds familiar. Well, we're expecting at this point to hear the story of David and Bathsheba. Except we don't. The chronicler does not include that portion of this story in his narrative. Why? Why does he do that? Well, I don't know if I have an absolute answer for that, except just to remember that what we have here in Chronicles is not a retelling of the entirety of Israel's history with every single detail that is mentioned in 1 Samuel and 2 and that's mentioned in Samuel's and the Kings, but instead it is a telling of history for a theological purpose. And I guess for whatever reason, the chronicler didn't feel necessary to include that portion in this story because it had already been covered. That had already been well addressed. That had been well detailed in 2 Samuel 11 and 12. And it just did not fit the purpose for his narrative here in the story. And that to me does not mean that he's trying to hide anything, because again, this is a well-known story. What we have here in Chronicles is after all this, all the rest of these writings have taken place, it seems to be Chronicles one of the latest writings in the Old Testament. In fact, we've talked about this before, that in the traditional Jewish Bible, in their Old Testaments, Chronicles is at the very end, because it is a summary writing, basically a summary work of Israel's history. So it's just not necessary to be included here, according to the mind of the chronicler and the spirit who worked with him. So it focuses, though, on the defeat of the Ammonites, that they end up going and attacking Rabbah. They demolish Rabbah. They take the crown from the king's head. They put it on David. It's a massive crown. It's super heavy. They plunder the city. They bring the peoples back and they make them into slaves. David did this to all the Ammonite cities, and then he and all of his troops returned to Jerusalem. And just think about this. Just think about where this chapter, the previous chapter 19, began, where this section of the story began. It began with David showing kindness to Hanun and his people. And yeah, they took it the wrong way. They got conspiratorial. They got all freaked out and said, "Oh, there's ulterior motives here," instead of just accepting the kindness that was shown to them. And it led to them being overrun, which really should have been done to begin with. Honestly, there was supposed to be a defeat of all the pagan kings around, and that ended up being the case here. So David's kindness, because it was not reciprocated, because it was rejected, in fact, and disrespected, he ends up taking care of them after all. Then we read in the last section of chapter 20 about the Philistines that they attacked, or that they went to war with. There was a war that broke out with the Philistines at Gezer, and we read about one of the descendants of the Rephaim being killed. The Philistines were subdued at that point, and the Rephaim were these giant individuals, these strong, in our minds, almost these mythical fighters. They were just huge in nature, and here is God allowing his people to have great victories over these mighty warriors. Same thing, verse 5. Again, there was battle, and Elhanan, the son of Jair, killed Lami, the brother of Goliath of Gath, and he had a huge spear that was like a weaver's beam, the text tells us. Additionally, and lastly, there's another battle at Gath. So this is 3 different battles that we have going on with the Philistines, where there was another man, an extraordinary man, who had 6 fingers on each hand and 6 toes on each foot, meaning he had 24 digits in all. He too was a descendant from the giant, and it tells us that he taunted Israel, which brings, again, back memories of Goliath doing the same thing, taunting Israel. And this time it is David's nephew, Jonathan, coincidentally named, that stands up and kills him. So again, this is just telling us of the great victories that David was having over the enemies that were against Israel. And all this goes back again to what is said in the kind of the very middle of our reading, that may Yahweh's will be done. And then what we've seen previously, that Yahweh made David victorious wherever he went. So we see that twice in chapter 18. All of this again gets back to they were having these great victories, not simply because David was a good warrior or a good military leader, great king, but because Yahweh was with him. Now I say that, and we're going to focus tomorrow. We're going to shift gears to recognize that the chronicler doesn't just whitewash everything concerning David. He's going to make mention in the next chapter of one of David's mistakes and some issues that come from that. We'll read about that tomorrow in 1 Chronicles chapters 21 and 22. Hope that you'll tune in then. Really looking forward to seeing everybody tonight for our Bible studies at 7 o'clock. We'll be looking at Moses' prayer to Yahweh that he would spare his people following their sins. A lot for us to learn there. I'm really looking forward to getting into that text with you as well. Again, hope to see you tonight, and I hope you'll join back in again tomorrow as we read from 2 Chronicles chapters 21 and 22. Take care. God bless.